Hello and welcome to Identirati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 160, and the topic is Redefining Data Security for AI Agents. I'm happy to have as guests the team from StrongDM, Justin McCarthy, co-founder and CTO, and Amol Kabe, Chief Product Officer of StrongDM. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Hey, Mike.
So before we dive into the episode, it's customary for new Identirati to give a quick background. Justin was already tortured with this task in episode 143, so he's off the hook. But Amol, you're a new Identirati, so maybe you could just say a couple of words about your career trajectory.
Yeah, Mike, I'm happy to be here. I've been CPO at StrongDM, focused on identity security for the last 2.5 years. Prior to that, I headed up Zero Trust and Identity and Access Management for Google Cloud. And then prior to that, I was head of product at Netscope. So most of my career has been in the networking or security space. And identity is becoming a key part of security, and even more important, as we'll find out in this discussion.
And so I had the luck of attending your Gartner session of the same title. So people who have access to Gartner stuff, the audio is already out. The slides are up there too. Title was Redefining Data Security for AI Agents. I kept the title the same. And I was sitting in the audience, in Grapevine, Texas. And so, but now I was going to ask you some questions after, but now I actually have you on the live stream.
On the hook.
If it's okay, maybe I could just share one of the slides as a starting point for the background, and we could talk about the risks. And let me get rid of the topic. I guess the question is, and either Justin or Amol, either one of you can take this. Like, what's different about AI, and what are the threats? And maybe we can reference in the slide.
Maybe I can start, and Justin, you can add on. The big difference, of course, with AI is that you no longer have predictability in terms of what is going to happen next, right? So AI models or AI agents are thinking and reasoning and coming up with new, unique steps to solve the goal that they've been set, right? For them to achieve the goal, business purpose, personal interest, you actually have to give them the data that is probably near and dear to you, and would be considered highly sensitive in, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Even today, it's considered highly sensitive, but the output is such that we're comfortable giving the data because the transformation leads hopefully to more value, right? This brings with it the risk of what happens with that data, how secure it is, and who has access to that data. All problems that we've seen crop up in various ways. And one of the problems that is new and unique is, in certain cases, the AI agent has decided to delete the data itself, right? There are problems inherent with the model itself. We've seen a number of risks with prompt injection, data poisoning, etc., that are there as well. Our thesis is that the foundation model folks will solve that over time because it's existential for them, right? And those are kind of some of the risks that you have to think about. And this acting, reasoning agent that's acting on your behalf also pulls in other tools to get its job done, right? This ability to synthesize a new tool or independently decide to pull in a new tool introduces yet more risks that were not present before. You could, in the past, say, I have a CI/CD pipeline, I audit all the code, I know what the code is going to do. It's a deterministic process. That is no longer true, and therefore, you need to have new mechanisms in place to achieve the security that you need with your most sensitive data to get the business outcomes that you need.
Mike, if I could add on to that, the one thing that I find is actually necessary as you open every AI conversation right now is to highlight and just go back again and again to the definition of an agent, because we don't yet all have the same shared definition of an agent. So I found it useful to point out that our internal definition is simply an LLM that's governing a sequence of tool calls. Okay, so that is an agent. That could be an agent that's running with a long-term mission, or it could be an agent that has received a delegated task from a mall. Okay, either way, the next step is going to be discerned and determined and invoked by the LLM. Okay, so if that is an agent, then really the blast radius of its actions are a function of the tools that you provided. Okay, so and those tools are often the traditional deterministic software. Okay, or as Karpathy says, software 1.0. Okay, so those software 1.0 layer, it still exists. It's just you don't know what path through is going to be orchestrated and invoked by the LLM. Okay, and so that means that whatever the tool space you give, essentially all of it will be invoked at some point, or you have no guarantees that it won't be invoked. And that is what really sets the premium on knowing the boundary and, or as we often say, the envelope around that agent in terms of what it's authorized to do.
Can I push back on that definition a little bit?
Yeah, please.
I think, when I think of an agent, I think of a piece of software that's using an LLM. So, for example, I have a piece of software, it's doing something, and it wants to ask an LLM, to tell me, what are the risky clients? And then the LLM does something, invokes some tools and comes back with a response. So I don't think of the LLM itself as, or to the extent that it is calling tools, it's doing that on behalf of a piece of software that is orchestrating perhaps multiple LLMs or multiple interactions with an LLM.
So I hear what you're saying, and I have found it productive I'm going to disagree with you, and actually to pin to the wall, like I'm in our AI team office right now in Palo Alto. On the wall, it says the definition of the LLM, of agent, and it's because what the example you just gave is actually indistinguishable from, let's say a software 2.0 classifier, right? So if I asked a classifier to look at a series of events in a regular machine learning model and come out with a list of risks, that wouldn't be quite different, very different, because you still have the control flow is still software 1.0 deterministic. Okay, when the control flow is handed over to the LLM, that's where agentic activity begins.
The analogy that I would give is a lot of people are living in the cruise control mode, if you want to go take autonomous driving kind of mode, but there are very few people who are sitting in Waymos and going, oh, wait, there is no ability for me to take over in case of emergency, right? It's completely autonomous. It can do, it can navigate you to where you want to go. You've set a goal and it takes you there, and you don't have to intervene. You're not expected to intervene, as opposed to cruise control, where you kind of may set some governance around the speed that you're going at. It may decide to keep some distance from the car in front. With Teslas, you can say, hey, for the most part, I can navigate the routine things, but I will turn over control to you in case of emergency. But in a Waymo, there is no turnover control to the passenger in case of emergency. It's taking you to that goal, or it's pulling over to the side. That's really what we mean by autonomous agents and the risk that they present, because Justin talked about giving them the tools. One of the tools you give them is a compiler. It can build a new tool to do what it thinks is necessary to achieve that goal. We've not lived in that world prior to this.
Yeah. So using your car analogy, actually, it seems like there are the car is a system comprised of multiple components, each with their own approach to software, some of which might use an LLM, and some of which we might need like expert systems. We might not want an LLM for certain problems, and we might even want to hard code certain other problems. So, and some of those components might need their own identity. Like one thing that I wonder about is, does the authorization engine need an identity separate than the agent that's calling it? because our trust relationship with the authorization agent maybe is different than our trust relationship with the software agent that's calling it. So I don't know, how do you differentiate, if you're going to use the car example, how many identities are inherent are embedded in that car?
If I could I take this one? Could I offer?
Sure.
So Mike, this is a very interesting thing because I use in a lot of the software we're constructing, we're using LLMs for subcomponents as well, right? So the car
Hmm.
analogy, the brake subsystem might be delegated, responsibility for determining different friction and momentum and inertia calculations, right? And some of those could even theoretically involve an LLM. Um, but the high level orchestration, which again, back to the car analogy, the actual driver,
Hmm.
the thing that's responsible for getting us to the destination and keeping us out of the ditch, that is the flow control orchestrator, and that's really the difference in the agentic moment. It is the thing that's making the ultimate decision and is ultimately responsible for turning left or right, while still depending on deterministic and non-deterministic like AI-based systems as subcomponents. Now, how that extends to identities, I think we're going to probably say the word composite identity multiple times during this during this talk. If you need addressability in each of those subsystems and they have some durable life of their own, then yeah, they need something in order to be able to collaborate. Sure, but they just because they have AI doesn't necessarily make them agents.
Okay.
And more importantly, I think going back to that composite identity, the human that originated the goal needs to flow through the system, because you don't want the agent to have more access than the human that originated the request, right? This is the classic confused deputy problem. It shows up
Sure.
more over here. And what you want to be able to do is use that human that originated the request and make sure that you have guardrails around what the agent can do that are no greater than what the human who originated the request could do. Right?
Right. Actually, so one of your takeaways of the talk was actually to design guardrails.
Yeah.
Um, but I want to back up a little bit before we go to the guardrails. Still stuck in the weeds a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the first call to action you had was treat AI as a new privileged surface area. Um, and I think by this you really mean agentic AI, right? But maybe you could expand a little bit about this.
Yeah.
So we've been talking. What's new about AI is that we have this piece of software which is not necessarily fully controlled by humans, and it's off doing whatever it thinks is best, maybe even writing new software. And we've never dealt with that um,
Yeah.
before. Um, and humans are using these AI systems, and you're saying, treat the use of the AI as privileged. But I don't know. I'm projecting what you mean by that. Maybe
Yeah.
you could flesh that
I
out a
think the
little.
easy way to think about it is it's a new principle that shows up. Now, if you were at Gartner, you saw Gartner, I think, classified it as workforce and workload, and this is just a new type of workload. What
Yeah.
we're saying is, for purposes of our discussion, it's actually easier to think of it as the principles that act on data are humans, machines, or agents. And this agent has the properties of both humans and machines. And let me amplify a little bit on that, right? If you think about humans, there's a large variety of actions they can take, but the volume of actions is pretty low. If you think of machines, there's a huge volume of actions they can take, but the variety that they perform is pretty low. You have a batch process runs the same thing day in, day out, all the time, right? The interesting property about agents is they have both the properties of machines and humans, in the sense that they are able to perform a huge volume of actions and a huge variety of actions because they're autonomous. And the velocity is machine velocity. And the challenge that we have is that a lot of the systems that we have today are not designed for something that acts with a huge variety of actions with a large volume with a high velocity, right? That challenge is really what we mean by saying you need to have the guardrails in place so you can govern what an agent is able to do. And if you treat it as a principle and use, for us, we're using Cedar extensively in our product, right?
Yay.
And
That's why you guys have been on twice. Yeah.
yeah, and the reason we chose Cedar is because it has that property of being able to mathematically prove whether a certain action is safe or not, right? And you can get deterministic outcomes in a non-deterministic system, right?
Right.
Uh,
That was sort of what my point is, that sometimes you want um, determinism. You don't always want, probabilistic answers.
yes.
Um, Justin, feel free to, if you want to comment on that. And I was going to pivot into the next takeaway about why identity should be at the center of that. But if you want to also bounce off of like, why is this a new privileged surface area, or why treat it as a new surface area? Why use that metaphor?
Okay. Well, whether we treat it as a new surface area or not, I'll just say like the most important thing is that we recognize that the Earth is shaking and maybe it's all tilted on its axis and something is different at massive volume. The horses have left the barn. It's already
Mhm.
happening. Okay, and you know this when you watch someone use Cloud Code for the first time. They'll use it. They'll type a command. It will prompt them for permission once, and then the second time they're gonna let all the doors open and they're gonna say YOLO mode, please, turn it all on. Okay, and that's
Yeah.
happening when you watch an individual interact with agentic AI, and then you hear stories, you talk to your friends, you ask enterprise questions, the secret whispered conversations in the corridor. Oh yeah, I sure did embed the Salesforce API key into this little script that Claude wrote for me, and now I've got really great insights into my CRM data. But I
Mhm.
had to violate a lot of policy to do so. And that experience is just happening pervasively right now. Okay.
Yeah.
Cases there
So,
isn't
so
even policy
Yeah.
moving so fast that policy has not kept up with the fact that people embedding API keys, giving it to Cloud Code and saying, go to town, right?
Asterisk did a good survey about GitHub projects, and they found 45% of the projects are using API keys. But more, what I got out of that report, more than the fact that people were using bad security, which doesn't surprise me, was the size and scope of like the number of projects was so huge in this short amount of time. So the number of MCP servers and agents that now exist really shows a meteoric rise of adoption that I haven't seen since browsers in the 90s.
correct.
This is not blockchain. This is something totally different. So I'm completely on board with what you're saying about the scale of this. And yeah, and it's really, the impact is really huge. Um, but yeah, let's pivot to the next part of that if we can, about why put identity at the center. As an identity, nobody loves identity more than me, but I don't. My feeling is that the ultimate goal for security is risk reduction, and I wonder if we're making the same mistakes in software identity that we made in human identity and replicating a system that doesn't work today. So, why should we put identity, whether it's software identity or human identity, at the center of this new system to rein in this unbelievable new wave that we're seeing in agentic AI security?
Justin, you want to take a stab in
I'm
that?
throwing that one on you, Justin.
All right, sure. I will say again, just because this moment is so large, because it's moving so fast, it's true that you need identity metaphors. It's true that identity, to the extent we achieved a perimeter before the agentic moment, you need to use that perimeter. But it actually doesn't. It doesn't do away with the old styles of perimeter and control as well. So what I would say is, an identity plays a role, but the network traffic, the API calls, the API gateways, really all of these services are interestingly present now in the question of how do we bound this risk with deterministic systems around a flow control that's governed by something that we can't always predict. Okay, so I would say that identity, and even just credentials, all forms of short-term authorization that are anchored in some sort of an identity system, whether they're held by a machine or originated from a person. I think it has to be an all of the above moment. That's my
Hmm.
take.
What I will say is, adding on to Justin, you need to know who the agent is acting on behalf of, right? To know who the agent is acting on behalf of, you have to have some way of passing that identity through to the end system so that there's an end-to-end kind of transitive relationship and transitive authority that flows through the system, right? Then you can govern it with all the mechanisms that you have or may need to invent in the future. In fact, what we're saying is that to truly secure these systems, you need to work on three dimensions. You need to have identity be the core of knowing uh, who it is so you can define what they can do with it. You need to know they're running in a trusted environment, in a secure environment that you can control what they have access to, what tool calls they're making, what they're able to import, etc. So that's that secure endpoint. And you need to be able to control um, where they can go to on the network, right? So you need to have all three dimensions covered: the OS host endpoint that they're operating on, the identity that they have and they present and flows through the system, and the network reachability, so they don't go off and start downloading malware from a compromised website, right? You need to be able to control it because they will. They're goal seekers. They will bypass any controls you put in place unless you have all three of these controls in place. um, they will find a mechanism to evade the guardrails that you attempt to put on them.
If I could push back a little bit on that idea,
Yeah.
there's a subset of important use cases. Humans are important, and
Yeah.
they do a lot of important privileged things. And so there's a subset of use cases that involves a person who's invoking some type of agent to do something for them. But there's another subset of of use cases where I'm a big fan of Veracent, the ITDR company, the identity threat detection. And I'm sure they have a lot of agents out there who are doing stuff, not necessarily on behalf of a person, but sort of on behalf of, of an organization in the background. So they might not tie their authority back to a human. Um, and I also wonder, when we say an identity, humans have a very rigid, static identity management process. You get hired, we have joiner, mover, leaver, and then we have a system of access certification. So there's a very rigid, sort of static, slow process that we use for people. And I wonder, if these agents are A, not necessarily acting on behalf of people at all the time, and B, if agents are using a different type of, let's say, operational model where they're making attestations about the platform. I'm a process running on an Amazon workload in this segment that's trusted. So they're making, or I'm a trusted Apple device. So the identity sort of builds up from the hardware layer through attestations.
Yes.
And then it's not really the identity we care about. It's more the layer of attestations and the layers of trust on top of those attestations that enable that agent to go. And so I just don't know that that metaphor that we're using, your put identity at the center, and I'll read you back. You say, put IAM at the center of AI governance. I don't like the I in there. And I think that of all the things that are important to us to make decisions about risk, what identifier gets issued to that particular entity is least important. We want to know the claims and the trust in that entity, not the identity. So,
um, Identity maybe was a shorthand, but if you talk about it more formally, it is the attestations that you care about, right? But how do you operate on something without knowing its identity or the attestation or claims that it makes, right? They all center from, and of course, if you can inherit formal attestation from the hardware, that's the best mechanism. I'm not sure how many people are doing that today. We will have to get to a world where we do that, right? The second thing I would say is in terms of organizations versus people, an organization has a CEO. The eventually it flows down from some human, right? And of course, in a large scale system, you'll be working on behalf of an organization, which is normally headed by the board of governors and delegated to the CEO, etc. So there's a long chain, but eventually there is some human at the end of that chain,
yes,
right?
there always is. As the CEO, I happen to know that
Yeah,
because
exactly.
mostly it's me who signs it. Justin, any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so Mike, I think if you don't like the word identity, you can actually still use an I in the acronym, and you could just call it identifier because you need an ID of some type. So, for example, if my company StrongDM has an integration with CrowdStrike, I'll just use one of the right
Mhm.
when our software communicates with CrowdStrike to ask whether that device over there is okay, I need an identifier that says I'm StrongDM. Okay, the application. Okay, that identifier can also come with all sorts of wonderful hardware attestations that say
Mhm.
this is not only is this thing claiming and has a secret that it's the strong VM control plane, it's also being called from a host that has an attestation from a hyperscaler that says it's coming from the region we expect. Okay, but you still need a registration that you can share across organizations. Okay, we call those identities when we talk about people. We called them NHI briefly, and SVIDs when we're thinking in spiffy terms. But really, it's an ID, and then that ID can be complemented by all sorts of other provenance attestations that you care about. Okay, so I'm going to say again, back to all the above, because we're going to need all the
Right.
help we can get to bound these new workloads.
Um, and certainly we need the identifier for logs, so we can tie back. We can create a cryptographic chain of custody where we can show this transaction ties back to this piece of hardware and probably to this human. Um, but I'm actually going to go a little more abstract here and say, what we don't actually have is identity, because the human connected to the device, that happens, and then we get some type of assertion, a JWT, that then gets presented downstream. So what you actually, like, sort of philosophically don't have is, I can't say, when we're in person, I can say this is Justin, this is Amol. But over in electronic systems, we basically have a piece of software that's saying, trust me, I authenticated a human, here's evidence of that. So we're ultimately not making decisions based on the identity. Ultimately, we're making decisions on the on the evidence presented, which is actually probably some type of JWT whose signature we can cryptographically verify. So is the input really identity? And so my question is, should identity really be at the center? Or are you saying accountability needs to be at the center?
I think that's where there is maybe implementation versus desire, right? We think that at this moment, um, how we think about IAM and how we think about this transitive property of what we actually trust to make these decisions will have to get blown up. We have this concept internally of what we call a composite identity, where um, anything that you present includes the human that originated the request, the identity of whatever originated the request, and that flows through the system. Now, that's been nirvana that people have been chasing for a long time, and we may never come to it, but we think that's the ideal situation. Now, as we all know, for speed reasons, everyone presents credentials as a proxy for the fact that you're authorized to do something, right? But you want to be able to work your way back to how that credential was created or presented, or why it has the authorization it does. What are the guardrails you need to put around that, anything that the credential is able to do, right, in a
Hmm.
third party system. So there are all of these challenges around what's valid, where is it valid, how do you cross trust boundaries, and there's a lot of prior art in terms of different mechanisms and proposals that are out there. If you go out there today, you'll see an alphabet soup of ATF standards that are being proposed. Um, what will win, we don't know. What we are focused on is, can we solve problems for our customers in the here and now, especially those who are struggling with how do we um, safely enable AI within our enterprise, right? That's really the key problem that we're trying to solve. And what we're saying is, some mechanism of the broader IAM ecosystem has to essentially get blown up and reworked to be able to solve this correctly. And if we are in that moment, why don't we start with something that flows that identity all the way through and builds composite identities and assertions along.
Mike, can I make one point on
Absolutely.
the people question?
Yeah.
Like, so we're talking, and this is just an implement. I'm gesturing. It's an implementation detail rather than the aspiration. I think what we aspire to, and what like we can all intuitively agree is probably like not super close, is I'm going to touch my keyboard now. Okay, so I'm touching my keyboard, and I'm going to take off my glasses so we have a really good retina view. Okay, so what you should be seeing is two biometric confirmations that you're talking to me, and that should be going from the secure enclave on my device, right, via that, and it should be showing up on the little panel you have to the side that's authenticating you're talking to a human. Okay, and then I take my finger off, and now you only have the retina and like the continued lidar image. Okay, so that's what we want, and that seemed like sci-fi, but now we have real good reasons to deeply want that. Okay, so my prediction is that there are a lot of folks out there that are going to be very, very concerned with turning up our expectations and standards on, am I really talking to a human? And I think there are a lot of pathways to, to achieving that. And then I have the same, I want to subject all the intermediate switches and network cables and everything to the machine version of same, right?
Yeah, it's a good opportunity. I want to pivot to the last topic, which has, in my mind, it's about metrics, but your last call to action was measure usage, safety, and resilience. Because if we don't measure it, we don't know how we're doing. And ultimately, what I like about Strong DM is like you guys have a very pragmatic approach. Like we're not going to be anything back. We're going to be whatever back solves your like issues. And just like in what you said before about wanting to solve real world problems, I think that's very, very grounded. I think PAM companies in general are more grounded in like what companies actually have to do today versus what Nirvana looks like tomorrow. Um, but measurement is really important here, and I think that there's two questions like what and how do we measure, but the more sort of existential question is like what do we measure? Um, and so the three things that you're saying here is measure usage, safety, and resilience.
Yeah.
And usage, I kind of get because like if we're going to say our software costs this much, we want to show how you're using it. If you don't know you're using it, how can we tell you should pay us for it? So that seems like sort of like well aligned with
Well,
vendors.
Justin has a great metric. He just tracks tokens per day, right? How many tokens have we consumed today in the new software that we're developing? And
Yeah.
that may be the new way of measuring, not API calls, not the safest thing to do is say,
Yeah.
consumed X number of tokens, and that's why I know the factory is humming, right? We're coming to the era of a software factory where
Yeah.
robots are these agents that are building software for us.
Well, by the way, do you mean tokens like LLM tokens, or do you mean tokens like JWT tokens?
The only kind of token, Mike. The only kind of token now. The only kind of agent and the only kind of token.
So I wanted to skip over usage. I think usage is sort of, yes, everyone wants to know usage for lots of reasons. So I wanted to talk about the other two, safety and resilience.
Yeah.
How do we measure safety and how do we measure resilience?
Could I Amal, could I do safety and then you could do your version? Because I haven't told you my version of safety. So like it's harder to get to, but it's actually related to tokens. It's the sum of the essentially like deterministic envelope that you give to an LLM process. So basically, how many tokens are you flowing through what size of envelope? So if that envelope is super big and it has a large blast radius and it can do a lot of moves, well, the number of actions that you're flowing through that is essentially your volume of safety vulnerable moments. Okay, and that is actually like you could kind of find a way to get there. So that's the agentic safety sort of denominator, and then the numerator being how many oopses you have over that denominator. You kind of care about both, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a good way of measuring safety right now, right? But it is something we should aspire to measure. We don't know how safe things are because no one's really measuring it. But we've heard the anecdotal evidence of some LLM vibe coding thing deleting production databases, production data, etc. Right? Now, as everyone knows, that happens in production all the time with humans doing it today. It just hits the news because it's now the new thing, which is LLMs doing it, right?
Right.
The one thing that I would say is the Justin is and his team have been pretty rigorous about testing um, the agents that they build, the software that they build, using other agents. So this antagonistic testing for
Hmm.
safety really needs to be part of the development kit that most people don't do today. The way we test software is broken in this new world because it can't be humans testing the software. It can't be unit tests testing the software. What you really need to know is I had an adversarial agent that tried to break the software and it was safe, right? Um, the
One more way we're out of jobs.
yes, exactly, right. Yeah. Uh,
How about if we could pivot? We're pushing up against the end, and I still have one more question beyond this. What about resilience? So safety is challenging. Justin has some cutting edge ideas, but more ideas are probably needed. How about resilience? How do you look at resilience as some, or what do you measure about resilience?
I'll defer to Justin again. I'll let him have the first stab because he's been thinking the most about this from an agentic perspective. Um,
Um, so I don't have a precise answer here, other than to say everything we did for resilience that allows you to basically roll back to a known good point is like I would say just turns up the premium on all that readiness. So that means all your infrastructure as code to be able to rebuild to a point, all of your basically ransomware protections that you already had in terms of backups and
Hmm.
snapshots. Those are all really good, coupled with basically the next generation of tracing. So, Mike, earlier you said instead of session recordings, which are kind of like enhanced logs for humans, maybe agents don't precisely need a screen recording. They do when they're using screens, but really a high fidelity log of the actions and the context that was present. So you can really get into a debugging war room as quickly as possible on how we got here. Those are all the contributors to resilience, and that's what I'm doing anyway.
Yeah, I had a guest 2 weeks ago, Scott Perry, and he audits, I guess, trust networks for governance. And the three metrics that he uses, which I thought are very interesting, are risk, transparency, and accountability. And risk aligns with your safety pretty well.
yep.
Like your and um, accountability, I believe, maybe also, but this is, I think, in GovOps, these are the three things we want to develop metrics for, because we feel like, well, risk, obviously that's the goal. How we measure it. My take on it is that in order to, the risk information by itself is not enough. We also need reward information. Like, are we taking this huge risk because we can do something little, or are we taking some huge risk because this is hugely important to the business? And without better metadata about both of those factors, we can't see the risk, or we can't prioritize the risk well enough. I think we could perhaps use some finance. I came out of the finance industry. I was a risk arb analyst before I was a tech person. And so in my risk arb world, I always want to know, if I'm invested in a deal, what's the risk reward of that deal? But maybe there are some other sort of, Black Scholes like risk analysis we can implant on this to come up with something, some better metrics.
Yeah. So
On
let me give you, let
accountability,
me give you some
sorry, go
new.
ahead.
Let me give you some new risks that are popping up. For example, these models are changing all the time. There's a new release that comes out, right? So if you used a deterministic system, you um, you assume that if you give input A, you're going to get output Y. That is no longer true as the models change. So
Yeah.
in terms of your resilience, one of the things that we're doing, for example, is we have multiple models that we use and test against. And again, you're testing the outcome to make sure that it's consistent in what you expect, using other agents, right? Not necessarily um, kind of the standard. I have a unit test that every time I give input A, it results in output Y, right? That's a risk, and that's a resiliency factor that you did not have to account for in the past. You have to be resilient to model changes. You have to be flexible to be able to move models. And if you really need a high degree of certainty, you may have to be able to say, I need to be able to lock into a model, which I don't think anyone allows you to do today very easily. The second thing is, if you are an extremely large entity with really high degrees of certainty, you may want to run a private model of your own where you have confidence that the world won't change under you, right? Those are risks that are new that were not present in the old world, right? And those require new ways of measuring and new ways of building resiliency that weren't present in the past.
Well, I think let's go to last thoughts because we're right at almost 41 minutes. And I'll have to reference people back to your talk if they're Gartner clients. If they're not, you guys I think have some webinars coming up. So let's go to last thoughts. Amal, would you like to take the first last thoughts?
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for having us on the show. In terms of if you go to the Strong DM website, you'll see other webinars that we're doing that are coming down the pike, and we look forward to hosting more thought-provoking discussions with folks around this new brave world that we're heading towards.
Awesome. And Justin, last thoughts?
Yeah, for any folks out there that are on the frontier or one of their neighbors is building a frontier agent, they've got an experiment, they've got a lab, they've got something going to production, and they want more predictability around how it's deployed. If you could just email me, just Justin at StrongDM. I've got sort of a private group of folks that are building frontier agents and deploying frontier agents, and then we're talking about this in terms of real world rubber meets the road situations. A lot of what I would also urge that group to think about is look at our leash project. You can just leash by StrongDM. You can find that. You can see how that sort of initial proposal for how to couple a very deterministic boundary on these otherwise unpredictable systems. So just email me if you want in on the agents group, just Justin at StrongDM, and then check out leash, please.
Awesome. Okay, I'll just quickly announce the next episode, which is a GovOps holiday special with Rohit Kar, who actually made up the term GovOps. And we've been working hard on this. I publish a lot of propaganda and articles, so I'll put that in the homework and looking forward to that. With that, I will say thank you very much, Justin. Thank you very much, Amol. Thank you, audience. And we'll see you next time.